Okay guys, moving on to this picture right here. You can see the layers moving on, going on to the brain. The very first layer on top is the scalp, the skin. Deep to that we have the periosteum. Deeper to that, the actual bone. So you have that skull layer. Then you're starting to have the dura mater. Dura mater in the skull, in the head portion, is 2 layers. Okay, first one periosteal layer, second one meningeal layer. Okay, so periosteal is superficial, meningeal is deep. That's the dura mater. Then you have the arachnoid mater. Okay, it looks like a spider web. And then pia mater is the very, very deep meninge. It sits right on top of the brain, and it's very vascular. Now, you have below the dura mater, you have the subdural space, and below the arachnoid mater, you have the subarachnoid space, which is where cerebral spinal fluid flows. In the middle, you can see the superior sagittal sinus, as well as the arachnoid villi, which we're going to get to later as well as the falx cerebri. In this next picture, you see those sinuses. You see the superior sagittal sinus going across the longitudinal fissure. You see the falx cerebri right next to it. Okay? Then the tentorium cerebelli going through that transverse sulcus, and transverse sinus right next to each other as well as the falx cerebelli, which is in between both cerebellums. Okay? So you have, again, superior sagittal sinus, falx cerebri right next to each other, dividing both hemispheres. And then that tentorium cerebelli, dividing the main brain, the cerebral cortex, from the cerebellum. And then you have that falx cerebelli, dividing both cerebellums, as well as the transverse sinus right next to the tentorium cerebelli. Now this next picture shows a different cut of the brain. It shows you a coronal cut. You see that it's much different from what you've been used to. You see in the middle, you have that corpus callosum. And from the model that you saw earlier, you know directly below that is both lateral ventricles as well as the septum pellucidum. And on the right below the corpus callosum, you see on the left is one lateral ventricle, on the right is the other one. You see that septum pellucidum, that thin membrane dividing both of them. That big bulb on the bottom of the septum pellucidum, that should be your fornix. Okay? Then you see 2 cavities below that bulb. Both of those are the third ventricle. Okay? Both of them. From that fornix, from those lateral ventricles to that third ventricle, you have that interventricular foramina. Okay? So that's what you see here. Next picture. This is the flow of the cerebral spinal fluid now. We're going to go over where it starts and where it goes. This picture is starting from that lateral ventricle on top, where that number 1 is in the middle. Starts in the lateral ventricle. Everything that you see that is red, that's the choroid plexus. Okay? So in that lateral ventricle, you have that choroid plexus making cerebral spinal fluid and moving it to the third ventricle. So from the lateral to the third ventricle, that's called the interventricular foramina. Okay? Interventricular foramen, which is that road from the lateral to third ventricle. Then third ventricle creates more cerebral spinal fluid and pushes it to go to the fourth ventricle, which is all the way in the bottom. Fourth ventricle and third ventricle are connected by that cerebral aqueduct. Once the fourth ventricle has created more cerebral spinal fluid, it's going to flow out from either the medial or lateral apertures, going down to cushion either the spinal cord or up to cushion the brain in the superior sagittal sinus. If you follow the arrows from the fourth ventricle, you see it's in that subarachnoid space, going up, all the way to the top of the all the way to the top of the brain. And you see those little bulbs, those light blue bulbs right next to the number 8. Those are the arachnoid villi. Okay? The superior sagittal sinus is directly on top of that, and is going to reabsorb that cerebral spinal fluid. Okay? So you need to know how to get from lateral ventricle all the way up to cerebral spine, all the way up to superior sagittal sinus. Okay? Lateral ventricle, interventricular foramina, third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct, fourth ventricle, median aperture or lateral apertures going down to cushion spinal cord or up to the subarachnoid space, and then eventually into the superior sagittal sinus. Okay, now last picture here. You see this is the spinal cord. Spinal cord is similar when it comes to meninges with the brain. You have that pia mater, the deepest layer, arachnoid mater is in the middle, and dura mater. But now you don't have two dura maters. You don't have two things for the dura mater. With the brain, you had that periosteal layer and meningeal layer. But now there's just one layer, it's simply called the dura mater. Okay? But now you have an epidural space, which is mostly lipid. That epidural space is where women get their epidural shot. Okay? On top, if you're looking at the actual spinal cord, you see the gray matter in the middle. Right in the middle of that little hole, that's the central canal. Okay? Deviating a little bit from that, the back portion, you have the dorsal horn, then lateral horn, and ventral horn. This is all of the gray matter in the middle of the spinal cord. Dorsal horn, which is for sensory, lateral horn, and ventral horn, which is for motor. Okay? Then all the white columns around the dorsal, the horns. You have the dorsal funiculus, which is in the back, the lateral funiculus, which is on the side, and then the ventral funiculus, which is in the front. Okay? So that's the spinal cord itself. You can see the nerves coming out of the spinal cord is the dorsal root with that dorsal root ganglion, that satellite cells inside. And in the front you have that ventral root. Okay? That's for motor, dorsal root is for sensory. And they connect together to make one spinal nerve. Okay? So this is the whole spinal cord. For the most part, everything you need to know. Brain was the last subject you're going to need to know for your lab exams. This was it for the videos for AP1. Good luck on all your finals, and we hope to see you for AP2 in York College in the Collaborative Learning Center.